Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in with us. It's my pleasure today to introduce Alexander, who's currently writing his master's thesis on what I consider to be an extremely important area and completely under-focused, which is the potential of biochar for solving the world's sort of emission and carbon issues. One of the main problems in working in this area is people really don't understand about the carbon negative aspects, how it's accounted, and therefore really don't get on board with the concept of biochar. But hopefully Alexander's going to give us an introduction to that today, and also the basis of how we can build some kind of economy or a platform for startups and larger companies to solve carbon emissions together. This is a introduction, his first webinar on this topic, so we'd be very grateful to have your participation and feedback so we can refine it and get it out to the masses. This is very much an educational issue. So with that, welcome Alexander, and please take over.
Welcome everyone. My name is Alexander and I'll be hosting today's webinar where I'll be sharing how biochar can be an opportunity for companies to offset and or reduce carbon emissions while creating new revenue streams. Do we care about carbon emissions at all? Well, right now we're experiencing climate change, and some people would call it climate crisis. But as it is with all crises, these can be seen as opportunities in the sense that if you help solve the crisis, then you provide real value, and then you should be rewarded accordingly, which translates into profits. Just to get an overview of where we are today, greenhouse gas emissions contribute to climate change, and nature and human emissions add up to 810 gigatons CO2 per year. Of those, 790 gigatons are reabsorbed by nature. So that's all of the natural emission and half of the human emission. That gives us a net total increase of 20 gigatons per year. The solution is quite simple, really. We need to reduce our emissions and remove carbon from the atmosphere. So a very important point, if we just reduce our emissions, we'll still add them, and then we won't escape climate change. So it is really important that we have technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere to get back to 1990 levels or just the levels we have today. Luckily, many people are working towards achieving a sustainable future. One great example is the UN, who put up the 17 Sustainability Development Goals. And just to take some examples how nations and companies are taking these to do action plans and business development plans, we can look at an example from the industry. Delta Airlines, they said, we put aside $1 billion to reach carbon neutrality by 2030. And the interesting part is that some of it will be to create greener ways of air traveling, but a large portion of this money will also be to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the so-called carbon negative technologies that Tom mentioned in the beginning. And that's very interesting from a biochar perspective. If we take a local example, then DFDS invested 10 million kroners in a green alternative to oil that they'll co-develop with Mash Energy and use in their ferries. If we look at political organizations, then Denmark put a new law last year, a new climate law, where they committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030. And the EU also committed, but just to 50% by 2030, and then carbon neutrality by 2050. That's all interesting, but what about the actions? So we have the newest finance law. That's how we delegate all our money in Denmark. And we put forth 25 billion Danish kroners for funding for this green transition. So there's really things happening. And what makes companies such as Delta Airlines and DFDS want to focus on sustainability? Maybe they're just altruistic and have a good heart, want to make the world a better place. But at the end of the day, companies need to make profit in order to survive. Then otherwise they can't do any good. So I put together some motivations for companies to really prioritize this green transition. And the first motivation is that all greenhouse gas emissions equal expenses. So that is that if you look at the two charts, you can see the carbon prices in the form of carbon taxes, and they can range from anything from 0 to 130 US dollars. Um, and if you look further to the right, we have something called allowances. So these are different schemes where you also pay for emissions. And if we look at the European ETS, then 1 ton of CO2, you would have to pay about $25 for that. I'm not able to predict the future, but these expenses might increase. And if they do, it's important for companies to be robust. And if they don't increase, then you didn't lose anything in one sense. And on a final note, sustainability can be cheaper. We see that, for example, by lowering our expenses or making a bigger investment in the beginning, it's good in the long run. And sorry for my attention. I just wanted to let the last people in. Another motivation is new environmental laws. We see them every year all over the world, and they're ever more strict. So to take DFDS as an example again, they just spent 300 million kroners to reduce their sulfur emissions to meet the new environmental law. If they don't do it, they become illegal and get out of business. If we look at the CSR strategy and why sustainability is a good point, then it can be used to attract and retain customers, as well as attract and retain employees. So for customers, this is known as conscious consumerism. We see a big interest in fair trade, organic, etc., and boycotting companies that are not ethical and moral in some senses. And for employees, then we have, all the spoiled millennials. We want many things, also to work for good companies. But one example is that 5,300 employees pushed the Amazon CEO for a climate plan, and he gave them that, and then that's been criticized afterwards. But at least it shows that employees are really dedicated to this. Another example is here to the right. Offset Earth was an absolute winner with our employees. It received the Best Benefit Award 2019. So Offset Earth is a company that does carbon offsetting. And then Victoria James, she's a director of some marketing company. So she says, I want all my employees to be carbon neutral. And then she pays Offset Earth to plant a lot of trees. And then they're all carbon neutral. So this can mean two things. Either the employees like sustainability, or else they don't have any good employee good things. So that's the only one that could win. But let's hope for the first. So how can companies solve this? Well, one way of offsetting and reducing emissions, the most simple and easiest and most efficient one is biochar, in my opinion. So it looks exactly like charcoal, but it's different in the sense that it has a high content of carbon. Let's say up to 100% or virtually 100%, depends on how you make it. And then the good thing is you can store carbon for as long as you like. You can put it in the soil, in building materials and others. And then when we need carbon in the atmosphere again, we can release it. So if we take one concrete example, then let's say we have 4 tons of biomass, preferably bio waste, that would just, if we go to the top, naturally degrade and then release 3.6 tons of CO2 back to the atmosphere. That's fine, unless there's too much, then it's a problem. On the other hand, we can do pyrolysis. So we take the biomass, heat it up in the absence of oxygen, and then the end product is biochar. So from the 4 tons, there's a mass reduction. We only have 1.1 ton of biochar. And if we say it's 90% carbon, then we have 1 ton of sequestered carbon. That alone is great. That's excellent. Then we effectively removed 3.6 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, but the actual saving could be much higher. So if we replace oil with green oil, for example, then we also have to take into account all the savings from pumping up the oil, refining it, transporting it, etc. So this is the bare minimum, and it's a really good minimum. So now I showed that the biochar has an excellent carbon CCS, carbon capture and sequestration potential, but it's almost too good to be true. It has a lot of other positive side effects. Let's look at those. What are the biochar applications? Well, the 2 biggest ones are feed supplements for animals, so fodder, and soil applications. So if you put a little bit of biochar in the fodder for your animals, you can get all these positive results that I'll read. Increased body weight, decreased FCR, What does FCR stand for? Feed conversion ratio. It means you give less fodder to the animals and they grow more. It can sound a little bit cold, but that's great for the person, the farmer who works with that. Sorry, multitasking. No. Yeah, so you feed less and you get more weight. That's great both for the animal and also for the end products such as milk and eggs. You reduce the methane emissions from the cows and reduce CO2 in the form of farts. Yeah. Then other good things, you reduce pathogens, less need of a doctor, a veterinarian, sorry. And you can see the survival rate goes up, the growth rate goes up. Basically, everything that can go well goes better. Everything that can go bad goes less bad. If we then look to the right into the tree, then I'll start at the tree to the left. We have carbon capture, we know that. We reduce N2O emissions, so nitrous oxide. We reduce methane emissions from the soil, and these two gases are potent greenhouse gases, 300 times that of CO2. So it's really good if we can reduce those. It can be seen as carbon negative energy. It can reduce odors. So if you put it in manure, which smells really bad, that's shit, or you put it in the barn where the animals put manure, then it removes the odors. It's quite, yeah, magical. If we then go down into the soil, we can see decreased nutrients runoff. That means that when it rains, usually nutrients will flood down to the aquifers or out into rivers, causing other problems with eutrophication. But the biochar is like a sponge. It holds all the nutrients. When there's too few nutrients, it's released back to the soil. Again, too good to be true. But it's not. Then we have increased soil carbon and increased soil fertility. In short, putting biochar in soil will increase the yield. And if it's bad soil, the yield can be enormous, like 400%. And if it's good soil, like we have in Denmark, it'll be maybe plus 5 to 8%, but plus 5 to 8% nonetheless. One important point here is that if you feed biochar to the animal, and then you have biochar in the poo, then you have actually 3 products in one, because the animal benefited, cheaper fodder, you don't have smell, so you don't have to spend money on a smell removal product if farmers use that. And you also get the biochar in the soil naturally, improving the soil. So this is known as a carbon cascade. That here I just mentioned 3 effects. They're actually more in play, but it just increases the value the more times you use it. And then now I talked about all these great things about biochar. So how come it's not used more today? Well, the first main obstacle is that in some cases it's not economically viable. I would argue that it's because you haven't looked at everything. So here I would say the solution is to use CHP, combined heat and power plant, then upcycle the end product. That is that you have an end product that you make into a more valuable product. You take advantage of public funding and you use the carbon credit system. So let's look into that. A combined heat and power plant. When we produce biochar, it's part of a big system, and there are many ways we can make money from this big system. First of all, you take some bio waste. Maybe you have to pay to get rid of this waste. You already save some money there. Then you do a pyrolysis plant. This can be very low tech for developing countries. You just dig a pit out in your garden, put some biomass, set it on fire. As soon as you have a little cover of ash, then you put the next layer of biomass and continue that process until you have burned all your pyrolyzed all your biomass. This is very labor intensive and time consuming. Not viable for developed countries, but might be in the developing world. Alternatively, for us up here, we're so rich, we can big pyrolysis, large scale plants, and then we get 3 end products. We get the top one here, permanent pyrogas or syngas, bio-oil, and biochar. You can upscale the biochar to biocoal, and then all of these 3 end products can be used as fuel. In the process, you create a lot of excess heat, and this heat you can sell for the district heating system, or you can change it into electricity. If we look at co-financing, then you have, for example, the GUDP. Here I put a quote, klimavirkemidler og tilpasning i landbrug. So that means if you want to do something that's climate positive, that you can use in agriculture, then you can apply for between 0.25 to 15 million Danish kroners. And this is until the 28th of May. But there's a lot of money available and you can keep on applying all the time. Just to take one example, Springkilde Æg, they produce a lot of eggs and they got 1.8 million to produce and develop a combined heat and power plant. It's not up and running yet, but they've been working on it for 5 years. And as you can see, they got a lot of financial help, soft money. If we look at how to profit from removing atmospheric carbon, then we have to go back to the Kyoto Protocol from 1997, which was effective from 2001 to 2020. And after that, the Paris Agreement will take over, which was decided in 2015. At the Kyoto Protocol, we make compliant markets. Then we have a cap and trade system that I'll explain very briefly. They made something called IETS, the International Emitting Trading System. And if we take a local example, we have the EU ETS, Emission Trading System. So if I'm a company and I have an allowance of emitting 10 tons of CO2, but I only emit 8 tons, then I can sell the last 2 tons of CO2 as an allowance to another company or another country, or I can keep it for next year. So that's the idea. Doesn't work excellent in practice. We have another system called baseline and credit system. Another system that we made during the Kyoto Protocol was the baseline and credit system. Here we have opportunities to do something called CDM or JI, so just ignore what it stands for. The important is that it's a project where you have proven that you've reduced emissions somewhere. So again, if I have a project and I reduced emissions by 2 tons, then I can trade it on the carbon market. And then ideally, these projects have to be less expensive than the money that I get for the carbon credit in the end. That's 2 kinds of markets. Then we have the non-compliant markets. Those are the voluntary carbon schemes or markets. Then if a company removes carbon from the atmosphere, then it can sell a carbon removal certificate to another company who can then say, I'm carbon neutral. That was the example we saw earlier with the company that had carbon neutral employees. The other obstacle, if we look at carbon pricing, this is all a great idea, but how well does it work in practice? If we look at the EU ETS system, it only costs 6 euros per ton from 2012 to 2017. But then there was a big surge in 2018, and now they cost about 25 euros per ton. So that's going in the right direction. If we look at Germany, then from 2021, they installed something which looks like a carbon tax, which costs about 10 euros per ton. And then the plan is that it will grow to 55 euros per ton by 2025. But the World Bank is in charge of overviewing these markets, and they said that 85% of global emissions are not priced. So it could be in agriculture when cows emit methane, or all the developing countries which didn't have any targets during the Kyoto Protocol, etc. So that's only 15% which are part of this pricing. And of those, if we look at 75% of those, the prices are below $10 per ton CO2. That's not so much. If we look at the World Bank, they set together a high-level commission in 2017, and they say price on carbon must be $40 to $80 per ton CO2 to induce change in behavior and priorities, and then $50 to $100 by 2030. If we make a little conversion to biochar, that means that you would get between 130 to 260 US dollars per ton biochar that you put in the ground. This completely changes the economical scenario. And the other main obstacle is that today there's a low biochar demand. And if you ask the biochar community, they'd say it's because of lack of knowledge and trust. So that's why the International Biochar Initiative, the European Biochar Foundation, they're pushing really hard to educate through webinars, educational programs for people that have biomass available to make it into biochar. But and then if you're a farmer and you know, oh yeah, I didn't know about biochar, now I know it's a solution, then you don't want to do it because nobody that you relate to is doing it. So there's a lack of trust and proof of results. So I will share with you 3 success stories where it's been successfully implemented, hopefully to inspire more people to use the same models. If we look at the Char line, that's an Austrian company, and they create fodder or supplements for animals. And all biochar companies sell soil amendment for agriculture. That's how it is. But here you can see the prices are between 85 to 170 euros per kilogram for cats and dogs, but then maybe you sell less. And then for livestock, it's only 1.5 to 15 euros per kilogram. And then hopefully you sell a lot more. They say that they can't meet the demand of biochar, so they have to buy biochar from other producers. That's a really good sign. They only use local biomass, and they have a full operation pyrolysis plant since 2016 that runs 20 hours a day. Then we look at Arex, that's a Canadian company. They produce biocoal and biocoke. So this can replace coal in coal plants, and they specifically sell it to Oregon, one coal plant there. And they cannot meet the demand, so the Oregon coal plant needs to buy all their biocoal and other products as well. So if we look at the price on coal, that's about 10 to 100 US dollars for coal in general. I don't know what the price is for them. And then biocoke is high energy density, so you can use it when you need high temperatures. And that's normally has a normal price of 129 US dollars per ton. So again, that's a good starting point and much more than what we've seen for many other applications. But then it's not so much CO2 negative. So it's about your values. I think it's good to start there and then go in the right direction. But of course, better to sequester all the carbon. If we look at the last one, that's Carbofex. How do they make money? They do it by carbon offsetting. So they're part of a voluntary scheme where companies who want to offset their carbon buy the offset. And at the last auction, it was between 70 and 40 euros per ton CO2. And now they're scaling up due to the high demand. The biochar they sell for horticulture and water filtration purposes. That's it for today. Thank you very much. And you're more than welcome to ask questions via email or call or come visit, then we have to sit outside. And if you have any ideas of some good enterprises, just let me know.
Alexander, thanks for a great presentation there. So the next step for this is to go live to different stakeholders, both political, companies who may like to buy or offset their carbon from biochar schemes, and also to promote towards people with biomass available, that perhaps something like pyrolysis could be a good solution so that they can turn this current zero or negative value product into something that is high value and extremely impactful for the environment. So that will be the next thing. We'll be doing some webinars over promoted through LinkedIn, but this is a test run. So if you have any feedback, if you'd like to be involved in the research in any way, please do give Alexander some feedback, and you're welcome to come to me as well. Alexander, thanks very much.